It was late at night, when the world was fast asleep. But in Afghanistan, the earth awoke with a fury. On August 31st, 2025, a powerful 6.0 magnitude earthquake struck in the darkness of night. Within seconds, villages were flattened. Thousands of lives were shattered. Families were torn apart forever. For the people of Afghanistan, already scarred by years of conflict, poverty, and drought, this was not just another disaster. It was a cruel reminder of how fragile life can be. Imagine sitting with your family at dinner, and in the blink of an eye, the ground shakes, the walls crumble, and your world disappears. Tonight, we take you inside one of the most devastating earthquakes in recent memory. The human stories, the desperate rescue missions, and the haunting silence left behind. This is not just about numbers. It's about people, survival, and the fight for hope amid tragedy. Stay with us, because what you're about to see is a story the world cannot ignore. On the night of August 31st, 2025, at 11:47 p.m. local time, the ground beneath Kunar Province, near the Pakistan border, violently shifted. The U.S. Geological Survey recorded the earthquake at magnitude 6.0 with its epicenter in Nergal district, just 8 kilometers below the surface. Though 6.0 may not sound catastrophic compared to megaquakes, the shallow depth made it devastating. Entire villages built of mud bricks and poorly reinforced walls stood no chance against the tremors. Within moments, roofs collapsed, streets split, and lives were buried under rubble. The initial shock lasted only seconds, but its consequences will echo for decades. Reports confirmed over 1,400 deaths and more than 3,700 people injured. At least 6,000 homes were destroyed or severely damaged, leaving tens of thousands without shelter. Aftershocks followed, including a 5.2 magnitude tremor just days later, deepening the fear and delaying rescue efforts. This earthquake is now counted among the deadliest disasters in Afghanistan's modern history, a nation already struggling with political instability, poverty, and food shortages. But behind these statistics lie stories of families, neighbors, and entire communities torn apart in a matter of minutes. And to understand the real tragedy, we must look closer. Numbers can tell us the scale of destruction, but they cannot capture the heartbreak. To understand this tragedy, we must look at the faces and voices of those who lived through it. In one village near Asadabad, a father spent hours digging through the rubble of his collapsed home with his bare hands. He wasn't searching for valuables. He was searching for his 2 daughters. By the time neighbors pulled him away, he was holding the lifeless body of the youngest. His cries echoed through the night, louder than the aftershocks. In another town, an 8-year-old boy was found wandering alone, covered in dust, his small hands trembling. Both his parents had been killed in the collapse. He sat silently, refusing food, staring at the ground as if waiting for someone who would never return. Entire families were wiped out in seconds. Survivors described the quake as if the ground itself had betrayed them. One moment we were having dinner, the next moment, there was nothing, one woman recalled, clutching a baby who was the only member of her family left alive. For rescuers, the hardest part was not just pulling bodies from the ruins, but hearing the faint cries of those trapped, then watching as the voices slowly faded before they could reach them. These are not isolated stories. They are fragments of a nation's collective trauma. And yet, amid the despair, there were also glimmers of resilience, neighbors helping neighbors, strangers offering water and blankets, and prayers whispered in the rubble. This is what disaster truly means. Not simply buildings falling, but lives torn apart, dreams buried, and memories that no rescue mission can bring back. Disasters rarely strike in isolation. For Afghanistan, this earthquake hit a country already weakened by years of hardship. Afghanistan is one of the poorest nations in the world. Many families live in rural areas, in houses made of sun-dried mud bricks, structures that collapse easily under seismic pressure. When the earthquake struck, entire villages simply crumbled. But the destruction of homes was only the beginning. The nation was already facing food shortages, drought, and limited medical supplies. Hospitals were overwhelmed within hours, with doctors forced to treat patients in tents and open fields. Electricity and clean water became scarce, increasing the risk of disease. Rescue operations faced nearly impossible challenges. Afghanistan's mountainous terrain, combined with poor infrastructure, meant that many villages were cut off. Roads were blocked by landslides, bridges collapsed, and communication lines went down. In some cases, survivors waited days before help could reach them. Adding to the tragedy is the country's political isolation. International aid has significantly declined in recent years, leaving the Afghan people dependent on limited local resources. While neighboring nations and humanitarian groups began sending assistance, the sheer scale of need dwarfed the available help. For survivors, every hour without food, water, or medical care deepened the crisis. Relief workers described scenes of desperation: parents begging for medicine, children drinking from contaminated streams, and families sleeping in the open under the constant fear of aftershocks. The earthquake did not just expose Afghanistan's vulnerability, it magnified it, turning existing struggles into a national emergency. When news of the disaster spread, the international community began to take notice. Neighboring India was among the first to respond, sending emergency supplies, tents, and medical teams across the border. The United Kingdom pledged millions in aid, along with shipments of food and clean water. Humanitarian organizations like the Red Cross, CARE, and Médecins Sans Frontières quickly mobilized, setting up relief camps in the hardest-hit areas. The United Nations issued urgent warnings. Without rapid assistance, survivors could face famine and disease within weeks. Helicopters dropped food packages into isolated mountain villages, while local volunteers risked their lives navigating blocked roads to deliver aid. Yet, despite these efforts, the scale of the catastrophe dwarfed the response. Tens of thousands still slept under the open sky. Medical supplies ran out faster than they arrived. In some places, families received nothing more than a single bag of rice to last them an entire week. Aid workers stressed that Afghanistan's crisis was not just about rebuilding homes, it was about rebuilding hope. But in a country struggling with political isolation, global attention is fleeting, and for the survivors, every delay in aid felt like another betrayal. In the end, the earthquake that struck Afghanistan on August 31st, 2025, was more than just a natural disaster. It was a mirror, showing the world the fragility of life, the resilience of the human spirit, and the cost of silence when tragedy strikes in forgotten places. Over 1,400 lives lost, thousands more injured, entire communities reduced to rubble. But these numbers cannot capture the empty chairs at dinner tables, the toys left behind by children who will never return, or the prayers whispered under the open sky by families with nowhere else to go. Afghanistan's story is not only about suffering, it is about endurance, about neighbors who become lifelines, strangers who share the last piece of bread, and survivors who find the strength to rebuild even when hope seems buried beneath the rubble. As the headlines fade, the people of Afghanistan remain. Their voices call out for compassion, for solidarity, for remembrance. The question is not whether the world can help. The question is, will we choose to? If this story moved you, share it. Talk about it. Let the world know that behind the statistics are people, just like us, who deserve not to be forgotten.